Welcome to Concordia Church Online.
Hi, welcome to Concordia's weekly message. Some of you are tuning in for the first time. I want to introduce myself. I'm Richard. I'm Concordia's pastor. Thanks for being here with us today. A couple of things that are going to help you to focus on the message. There's a listening guide that you can download that'll help you kind of keep track of where we're going. Also, there's going to be some spots in the message where I'm going to ask you to pause and think about some things. I want to encourage you to do that. That'll really help apply things to your own life. There's some singing elements we're going to add in that. Those will be coming at you shortly. Also, I want to encourage you to find a place somewhere to give financially to some cause, something that's beyond yourself. Because here's what that's going to do when you do that. It's going to be an antidote to self-centeredness. And that's a good thing. The other good thing that happens when you give is you take steps into God's heart, because we believe that God's a generous God who gives us everything that we have. So I'm going to encourage you to find a place somewhere to do that. Thanks again for tuning in today. Those singing elements are coming at you right now.
I was buried beneath my shame. Could carry that kind of weight. It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I walked out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Mercy has freed my soul. Freedom is all that I know. The old made new. Jesus, when I met you, you called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy. Chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Well, love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. 'Cause when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. glorious day.
So after a year plus of what I'd call overload, I mean, now what? You'd think that an extended shutdown would have given us some rest from the stress and the strain and the struggle and the hectic pace that everyday life had become for many. And for some it did, but for others it didn't. I mean, there were some people who were working all the way through the pandemic and constantly having to change and adapt to constantly changing conditions. And I got to tell you, as someone who did that and who lives with someone who did that and who watched a lot of people doing that, that's exhausting. At times, it really wears you out after a while. But wasn't much better for other people either, because people faced almost constant instability and insecurity in their lives, and there was this new stress and strain of being cooped up in the same space with very little chance to retreat to that private space and that me time and that alone space that so many people seem to crave. And you know what? A lot of relationships really suffered from that. It's been an intense year, hasn't it? Seems to me like it's been one of those dog years, like 7 years rolled into one without all the dog sleep to compensate for that. So the results of this year of overload, there's a lot of people who are just spent, right? They're tired, they're exhausted, they're worn out all the time. And there are people who are just like stuck in neutral. You know, I've been reading about this thing called decision overload. It seems there's some research that there's only so many decisions a day and so many decisions over time that you can actually make, whether it's big ones or small ones. And you know, through COVID, there were so many different decisions that had to be made all the time that some people, I think, you're just overloaded and you can't make any more decisions. So maybe if you're in one of those places where you're kind of, I know I should do this, but I just can't seem to get going doing it. Maybe you're in that stuck decision overload place. And you know what, even if you're not there yet, you know, if you have to adapt and change one more time, well, you've had it with adapting and changing, right? And then there's people who are just experiencing sort of a general feeling of, well, blah. You know, kind of like no real sense of purpose or direction, and life just goes on, but it's just kind of hard to move forward. You're just kind of there, like a sailboat kind of bobbing up and down on the ocean with no breeze in sight. Right? If you're in any of those places, and you might be, because a lot of people are, and a lot of church people are, and a lot of churches are, you know, it's normal after the year that we've had. But if you stay there, if you stay in that place that's stuck and spent in the doldrums and unable to move forward, that's really frustrating space. I think Jesus' friends seem to be in that space in the 6 weeks or so after Easter. Now, as we peek into their story again today, we're going to see what Jesus does to actually lead them through those not so pleasant feelings of and results of overload, and what Jesus does to renew their spirit. Renew their spirit, and even to give them a new sense of mission and purpose. Let's look in.
After this, Jesus appeared to his disciples again. It was by the Sea of Galilee. Here's what happened. Simon Peter and Thomas, who was also called Didymus, were there together. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee and the sons of Zebedee were with them. So were 2 other disciples. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. They said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat. That night they didn't catch anything. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, don't you have any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat. There you'll find some fish." When they did, they could not pull the net into the boat. There were too many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Simon Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Peter heard this, he put his coat on. He had taken it off earlier. Then he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat. They were towing the net full of fish. The shore was only about 100 yards away. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals. There were fish on it. There was also some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat. He dragged the net to the shore. It was full of large fish. There were 153 of them. But even with that many fish, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them. He did the same thing with the fish. This was the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead.
So let me give you a little context to the story here. It's a little while after Easter, but it's before Jesus' ascension into heaven. And so Jesus had made some appearances to show his friends that he's alive. And so the gloom of Good Friday, he's dead, has been replaced by the joy of Easter. He's alive, but it's not normal yet. It's not like normal is back to normal, meaning back to the way that it was. See, the in-person appearances of Jesus, they were sort of inconsistent and haphazard. And by the time of this particular event, it seems that the gang of 11 weren't even hanging out together all the time anymore. And the mood among his friends seems to be, well, a little more uncertain than celebratory. Because they don't really seem to know what their life is going to be like. I mean, they know Jesus is alive, and they've seen him now and then, but he's popping in and out, and they don't really know what their life's going to be. They got this sense of, well, maybe it's going to be a little different, but they're not sure of what their place in it is. They're not even sure what Jesus' place in it is. And I'm pretty sure that right now they're on overload. Right? They're overwhelmed because of all the things that have happened, the intensity of the last couple of weeks. It's caught up with them. And they're overwhelmed, and they're tired, and they don't know what to do, and they're really incapable of making any decisions. They're just kind of there. And they're feeling kind of out of it. And so as the story opens, Peter says, "Well, I'm going fishing." Now, why I'm going fishing? Well, I think it's at least it was something to do, right? And if you've read any of the stories of Jesus' life, you know that Peter's a doer. And so sitting around and thinking and brooding and feeling, I mean, that's just not in his skill set. So what Peter does, he's a man of action. And he's got to do something. And so Peter, who's the best doer and decider in the group, he just decides. And what he says is, okay, the intensity's kind of gotten to us, and we're overwhelmed, and we're not really able to figure out what to do next. So that's not doing us any good. So let's go back and do something that we know. All right, something that feels normal. Something that was normal before all this even got started. Something that's just comfortable. Something that feels right. I'm going fishing. And a bunch of his friends joined him. I mean, what could it hurt, right? It certainly seemed better than nothing. At least they were doing something. At least they were doing something familiar. At least they were doing something that felt normal. So, you know what? There's nothing wrong with fishing. Except that was not God's plan and purpose for them right now. And that was not the mission that God had in mind for them in the new normal. And that was not what Jesus had called them to do and for the better part of 3 years had prepared and trained them to do. You see, all time had really come together at the cross. And God's great rescue mission, it had been completed through the death and resurrection of Jesus on the cross. And Jesus' disciples had been called and prepared by Jesus to share the results of that death and resurrection. That there's hope and healing for all who would believe in Jesus. I mean, that's their mission, but the disciples, well, they didn't seem to remember that. In fact, maybe after all they'd been through, they really even couldn't remember that at this moment. And they hadn't yet received the Great Commission either, so there was no real focus to what they were supposed to be about. And Pentecost hadn't happened, so they hadn't received the special gift of the Holy Spirit to give them the power to do what they were supposed to do. And so they weren't sharing anything yet. They were just fishing. Just doing what seemed, what felt normal and right to them, and thinking maybe that would put their world back together. Now, that's understandable, given all they'd been through, but it's not what God wanted for them now. And also in what's becoming a pretty familiar pattern, they couldn't seem to get themselves out of that space where they're stuck in. They couldn't seem to get themselves out of it by anything they were doing by themselves. What they needed was Jesus. They needed Jesus to help them through those doldrums. What they needed was for Jesus to renew their spirit. What they needed was for Jesus to give them a renewed sense of calling and purpose and mission and resolve to do the work that he was calling them to do. Right? But now we're going to look at that next. But before we get there, I think, again, because we're going to find some things that are going to help us, we have to get in touch with what our here is like. And so what I want you to do is take a few minutes and hit pause and think about these things. Talk through it. First of all, talk through this. Where do you find yourself going through the motions right now? Kind of like Peter and the other disciples were doing. Where do you find yourself going through the motions? And the second thing is this: what's your going fishing? Meaning, what are the things that were part of your normal in the past or part of your church normal in the past that you're kind of hanging on to and going back to and find yourself hoping that doing those things is going to help you navigate through this new normal and the kind of blahs that are there right now? Go ahead and spend a few minutes talking about that. Okay, let's get back into the story. Let me take you back in the text here, down at verse 3. So they went out and got into the boat. That night, they didn't catch anything. So remember, Peter says, I'm going fishing. Notice that I'm going fishing with you. Maybe that's going to make us feel better. Right? So they go out fishing, and they catch nothing. Interesting, I think, that their own efforts to get them out of their funk got them exactly nowhere. They're still in the same place. Maybe they're even feeling worse because, what fisherman likes to catch nothing? And I think maybe there's a lesson for us. Much as we want to engineer this or fix this by ourselves, maybe we can't. Maybe the lesson for us is we might not be able to get ourselves out of these doldrums, out of this funk, out of the results of all this overload. That's especially true if the intensity has been hard and long like it has. We're just overwhelmed and we're not seeing things clearly, and we aren't putting any fresh wind into our sails, and we're going to come back to that. But for now, let's look at what Jesus does to help him through that. Okay, let me take you back into the next sentences. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, don't you have any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat. There you will find some fish." When they did, they could not pull the net into the boat. There were too many fish in it. Now, I want you to notice what Jesus does there. 3 really important things that help them out of their funk. But the first thing Jesus does is he shows up where they are. He shows up where they are, and that's really becoming to be a pattern in these resurrection appearances of Jesus. Right? He doesn't wait for us to come to find him where he is. He doesn't wait for us to come find him on our own, or to set out in his direction, or even to pull ourselves out of our own funk. God seeks us. Right? God seeks us. He comes after us. He reaches out to us. He initiates contact with us, whatever our spiritual or emotional state is, because that's what we need. And that's what Jesus does here. All right, Jesus calls out from the shore, and he initiates contact with them even before they know who he is. Now, the second thing I see Jesus doing here is he reminds them who he is. It's the Lord. All right, and here's how he does that. Throw your net to the right side of the boat, he says. There you'll find some fish. And when they did that, they couldn't pull the net into the boat. There were too many fish in it. And for John, a light bulb goes on, because he's like, it's the Lord. I remember something like that. Way back in the beginning when he first called us to be fishers of men, to follow him, there was the same sort of huge catch of fish. Check it out sometime, Luke chapter 5. And they're starting to dawn on them and saying, well, wait, nobody else but Jesus has the power to do something like this. Nobody else but Jesus does miracles of abundance like this. Nobody else but Jesus speaks, and things just happen at his word like that. It's the Lord. And with that one action, and that one word, cast your net over here, and then it's filled with more fish than they can carry. With that one action and one word, Jesus brings all their past history with him to mind. And he helps them remember their experiences with him so they know who he is. And so that they know that he's there. And that said, they know that he's there for them. It's the Lord. And a little wind starts to fill their sails. A little wind starts to fill their sails, and they're not quite so overwhelmed anymore. And they're not quite as stuck in a rut, not quite as burdened, not quite as unable to figure out the new normal as they were just a little bit a while ago. It's kind of cool how remembering the past helps us see God in the present. And that's what's happening here. But they're still not out of the funk yet, not for the new normal that's coming. And so Jesus does something else here. Jesus actually invites them to come closer and to hang out for a while. That's the third thing I notice. Jesus invites them to come closer and to hang out with him for a while. Let me read that again. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals. There were fish on it. There was also some kind of bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat. He dragged the net to shore. It was full of large fish. There were 153 of them. But even with that many fish, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them. He did the same thing with the fish. Now, as I'm reading that, do you notice some things going on there? Jesus has actually prepared for them to hang out with him for a while. He prepared a meal, the fire, the fish, some bread. It was all there. It was all a gift of Jesus from him to them, not just to ease their hunger after a long night of fishing. I mean, they needed that, but it was much, much more. Right? Really, it's remember they're out fishing because they're feeling blah, and after all they've been through, not even a meal or a banquet's going to change that. But the presence of Jesus is. The presence of Jesus is, which is why he says, "Come, have breakfast." He's like, okay, come. It's an invitation to a specific location. He's like, come guys, here, right here, over here, where I am. Come close to me, to this spot, and let's hang out for a while. And everything's ready and prepared for us to do that. All right. See, the real gift of Jesus here isn't the gift of food. It's the gift of fellowship. It's the gift of time. It's the invitation to linger and to hang out. Not just to see that he was real, because those other appearances that they'd seen before had told them that. This was the invitation to hang out for a while and to linger with him, to lounge with him, to be with him, to let the moment last for a while, because that's what meals in those days did. Even cookouts by the water lasted a while. And that's what Jesus intended. Because what he knows is they needed his presence. They needed his presence to strengthen them, to encourage them, especially to refresh them, to renew, to restore their spirits, to give them joy. I mean, can you just picture the scene there? Can you imagine the stories and, the laughter around that fire? I can. Can you imagine how refreshing and renewing that was for them? I can. And maybe that's the turn here into the new normal for them. All right, maybe this meal around the fire with Jesus, this lingering time with Jesus, is what helped them get past that feeling of being overwhelmed and burdened and blah and unable to figure out what to do, and what helped them to actually start moving toward what their new normal was going to be. Right? They're not there yet. Jesus' ascension is still coming, and that's going to focus the mission. And Pentecost is still coming, and that's going to give them the power to do it, but they're on their way. They got a little wind in their sails again. Maybe they're even starting to see a little bit of their future, not only because Jesus renewed them, but because he renewed them in a way that reminded them of their original calling. Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. So, how does Jesus do the same thing for us when we're overwhelmed? That's the question I want you to spend a little time thinking about before we go on. Hit pause and take a moment to reflect on, where does Jesus invite you to linger with him? And what do you find renewing about that? And also, just as important, what can you do this week to take him up on his invitation? Do it now. So, what's the solution for this year of overload and the results of feeling blah and tired and spent and worn out and having a lack of direction about pretty much everything? Well, remember what Peter tried? Peter's first attempt was, let's go fishing. Do what I know. get back to the way things were. Remember how that worked out for him? Really didn't fix anything, really didn't solve anything. He went fishing and he caught nothing. And I think we can learn something from that. Okay, whether it's your family life or if you're a believer, whether it's your church life, it seems like we think the way to get back to normal is to do what we know was normal. Right? The solution is not just to do what's familiar because it's familiar. And that's not activity for the sake of activity. And it's not spiritual activity just for the sake of spiritual activity, just going through the motions of doing the same thing the same way and I was used to because that's the way I was used to it. It's certainly not more activity or overactivity because, well, I couldn't do it and now I can, so I'm going to do it. I mean, all those things, they're trying to fill a hole with something that doesn't really fill a hole. I mean, it looks like it will, but what ends up happening is over the course of time, it just runs out slowly and all you're left with is the hole. All you're left with is what Peter got at the end of a long night of fishing. Nothing. And that really is no good. Because the solution to making it through the tiredness and the blahs of life and the spentness and the lack of direction, it's what happened at the end of the story. Right? The solution is reconnection with Jesus. The solution is renewal in Jesus. The solution is rest in Jesus. The solution is lingering with Jesus and finding a renewed sense of calling and purpose and mission in Jesus. And again, guys, that's what Jesus wants for you. That's his pattern. He wants that for you today. So just like he did back then, he's here right now. He's here right now, today, here in this space that you're watching or listening in to renew you and restore your spirit. Now, there are some things that you can also do to partner with Jesus in that. First one is this: look for Jesus. And keep looking for Jesus. Okay, remember his pattern that Jesus is there. And he's wanting to help you through the mess. And so even if you can't see him, he's there and he's seeking and he's searching and he's calling. Guys, look for him and keep looking because you need it. You need him. Second thing you can do is to listen to Jesus. And listen means not just hearing what he's saying, it means obey. Even if you don't like it or understand it. I mean, there are going to be times like that in life. Remember that here's this guy on the shore that they don't recognize yet, and he's telling these professional fishermen who've fished all night and caught nothing, hey, throw it over to the other side of the boat. Now, it doesn't make any sense that they would listen to him, but they did. They heard what Jesus said. They listened to him. They obeyed. How'd that work out? Pretty good. Well, it works the same way for us. When Jesus said something, listen to it. Obey him. Do it. Trust his word. It works out. Third thing you can do to partner with Jesus is this. When you hear his voice, come to Jesus. Right? Remember how he invited them, here, come have breakfast? Let me read you something from Matthew chapter 11, and it starts at verse 28. Here's what Jesus says. Come to me, all who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Is that you? From this year of being overwhelmed and overburdened? Tired from carrying heavy loads? Come to me, Jesus says, and I will give you rest. Place my yoke over your shoulders and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble. Then you will find rest for yourselves, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's that same place word, here, where I am. Come near. And we know Jesus is here in his word. He's here in communion. He's here as we gather in worship. Jesus is there. Where two or three are gathered in his presence, Jesus says, there in my name, there I am with you. So come to me, and I'll give you rest. And the fourth thing you can do is linger there for a while. Right? Linger with Jesus. Just hang out. Eat and drink and receive what he lays out before you, and stay a while. Don't be in a hurry to go. Remember those stories. Share those stories. Laugh with Jesus. Make it a meal, not a drive-through. Right? That's how, when you're overwhelmed and you're overloaded, you get rest and you get renewal. And you even start to get a renewed sense of mission and purpose. So here's my question that I want to leave you with. If you're one of those who's overloaded from the year that's been passed and you're kind of tired and burdened, what are you going to do to linger with Jesus? How and where are you going to linger with Jesus this week?
Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Freedom conquers, all our chains undone. Sin defeated, Jesus has overcome. Triumphed when the third day dawned. Darkness was denied when the storm was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our